night Aurelis Corporation celebrated its 10th anniversary. The lobby of its headquarters blazed with champagne light and the easy laughter of people who had never once worried about money. Crystal chandeliers cast amber warmth across the marble floors. Waitstaff, in pressed white jackets, moved like silent currents through the crowd, bearing trays of things that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Investors from 4 continents stood in clusters, voices low and assured. The way voices sound when every sentence is worth something. Outside, winter had pressed itself against the glass, and inside that bright, indifferent warmth, a man in a faded green work jacket stood near the east corridor, holding a pruning tool, looking up at the building with eyes that held something no one in that room could have named. Not bitterness, not resentment, something older. Something closer to grief. His name was Daniel Carter. He was 52 years old. His boots had mud on them. His jacket had a small embroidered logo, a stylized leaf that nobody noticed anymore. His hands, which had shaped the living walls and rooftop gardens that made Aurelis's campus famous in architectural magazines, were calloused in a very specific way. The kind of calluses that come not just from physical work, but from a lifetime of building things. He had been trying to reach the maintenance corridor behind the east atrium. The system he'd installed and calibrated nearly 2 decades ago, a climate regulation network tied to the building's living walls, had been throwing error codes for 3 days. The new maintenance team hadn't been able to trace the fault. Daniel had seen the alerts forwarded to the landscaping contractor's shared inbox and had driven 40 minutes in the cold to fix it himself, the way he always fixed things. Quietly, without being asked. He never made it to the corridor. The security guard's name was Tyler, and he was 26 years old, and he was doing exactly what he'd been told. "Sir." Tyler stepped into Daniel's path with the particular posture of someone who has been given authority they didn't fully understand. "This area is restricted for the evening. Event personnel only. I'm contracted maintenance," Daniel said. His voice was unhurried. "The climate system on the east wall is running hot. If I don't, sir, I need you to move toward the service entrance." Daniel looked at the young man. He didn't argue. He recognized the situation the way a man recognizes weather, not personally, just factually. He was turning toward the service corridor when he heard her voice. Amelia Grant had been watching from the mezzanine. She was 32 years old, and she was considered, by the publications that considered such things, one of the most formidable executives of her generation. Forbes had put her on 3 covers. She had a reputation for precision and an appetite for control that her admirers called vision and her critics called something less flattering. She had dark hair worn in a severe knot and wore a charcoal dress that cost approximately as much as Daniel's truck. She came down the mezzanine stairs not because she needed to. She came down because she wanted the moment to be in person. "Who let a groundskeeper into the main lobby?" she said, and her voice carried clearly, deliberately across the marble floor. Heads turned. A few investors glanced over, instinctively assessing for threats to the aesthetic of their evening. "I was just leaving," Daniel said. "You certainly are." Amelia stopped 6 feet from him and looked at him the way people look at things that shouldn't be where they are. "I don't know what protocol you were given, but this event is for board members and institutional partners, not a small, precise pause landscaping staff." Tyler stood very still. 2 other employees near the check-in table found something urgent to examine on their tablets. Daniel looked at Amelia Grant. He looked at her the way he had looked at the building, with something behind his eyes that she was not equipped to read. "The climate system on the east living wall is running at 104 degrees Fahrenheit, he said. "The plant mass in that corridor is a fire suppression feature integrated with the building's central HVAC. If it overheats, security." Amelia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Please escort this man to the service exit and find out which contractor authorized his access tonight." Daniel stopped talking. He looked, once, at the logo above the main reception desk, the stylized arc of green light that had been the original company's symbol. He had sketched it himself, on a napkin, at a diner table 22 years ago. The napkin was probably in a landfill somewhere. He let Tyler walk him toward the service corridor. He did not look back. He did not explain. Not yet. Daniel Carter had lived in the same house in Millbrook for 14 years. It was not a remarkable house. It had a covered porch, a vegetable garden along the south fence, and a workshop in the garage where he kept tools organized with the kind of care that suggested a mind built for precision. His daughter, Lily, was 23 and in her second year of graduate school in environmental engineering. She called him every Sunday. She had his eyes and her mother's laugh, and she had never once, in her adult life, heard him complain. His neighbors knew him as quiet, helpful in the specific way of people who act without announcement, plowing the Hendersons' driveway after snowstorms, fixing the drainage issue at the corner that the city had ignored for 2 years. He brought vegetables from his garden. He remembered people's names and their children's names, and what mattered to them. He had been on the landscaping contract with Aurelius for 6 years. Nobody at the company's corporate level thought very much about the landscaping contract. It was a line item in facilities management. Daniel was the lead technician on the account, which meant he supervised 2 younger crew members and was responsible for the maintenance of what had become, under his care, some of the most admired corporate green spaces in the region: the rooftop gardens, the living walls, the atrium that had been featured in 3 architecture publications and appeared in the background of every Aurelius press photo. His direct supervisor at the landscaping company, a practical woman named Bonnie Walsh, had once told a colleague that Daniel Carter was the most technically sophisticated person she had ever employed, and that she had no idea why he was working for her. She wasn't wrong to wonder. The people who had been with Aurelius, or rather, with the company that had preceded Aurelius from the beginning, knew. The ones who remained. There were not many. Among them was Walter Strauss. Walter was 71 years old. He had founded the company with Daniel Carter in a shared workspace in 2002, the year Daniel was 31 and Walter was 49, and they had been, for 4 years, something extraordinary together. Walter was the businessman. Daniel was everything else. Walter had kept a photograph on his desk for 20 years. It showed 2 men in the same shared workspace, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and hand-drawn system diagrams. Both men were laughing. The younger one, lean, dark-haired, clearly mid-thought, had a marker in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, and the expression of a man who has just cracked something open. That photograph was still on Walter Strauss's desk. He was chairman of the board now, not CEO. He had stepped back 4 years earlier, carefully groomed Amelia Grant for the role, believed in her capacity for leadership in the way that older architects believe in younger architects who have studied the right things. He had not expected her to become what she had become in the past 18 months. The presidency had changed her, or perhaps she had always been this, and the altitude had simply made it visible. Walter had been meaning to have a conversation with her about it. He had not yet found the right moment. The company had started as GreenSync, not a landscaping company, a technology company. Specifically, a company built around a proprietary system Daniel had developed during his years in electrical engineering and computational systems, a platform for integrating biological elements, living walls, rooftop gardens, planted corridors, with a building's core energy and climate infrastructure. The concept was, at the time, considered eccentric. The concept was, within 5 years, considered visionary. Daniel had designed the core architecture himself. Every layer of it. The sensor networks that monitored plant health and ambient temperature simultaneously. The feedback algorithms that adjusted HVAC load based on real-time biological data from the living systems. The interface that allowed building managers to treat their green infrastructure as active climate partners rather than decorative additions. He had not just designed it, he had written most of it. He had also, during a period when the company had no money for consultants, physically installed the first 3 systems himself, crawling through ceiling cavities, running cable, calibrating sensors with instruments he'd modified because the commercial versions weren't precise enough. GreenSync's first major contract had been a commercial complex in Hartford. The energy savings in the first year had exceeded projections by 30%. The case study had gone everywhere. Then his wife, Caroline, had gotten sick, glioblastoma. The word had arrived on a Thursday in October and rearranged the entire geography of Daniel's life within about 48 hours. Caroline had been 36. She had been a botanical researcher at the state university, which was not coincidental. She had been the person who first made Daniel understand that plants were not ornamental, but functional, that the boundary between biology and engineering was a human imposition rather than a natural fact. They had met at a conference. He had been presenting on sensor networks. She had been presenting on mycorrhizal communication systems, the underground filament networks through which trees share nutrients and chemical signals, a kind of language the forest speaks below the surface. They had talked for 6 hours and been together for 12 years. She was the one who had told him, early in their marriage, that the most durable structures were the ones that worked with their environment rather than against it. He had taken that as engineering advice and as something more. When he had designed GreenSync's integration framework, he had thought of her often. When she got sick, Daniel did not negotiate with himself about it. He restructured his life entirely, immediately. With the same methodical clarity he brought to technical problems, he reduced his role at GreenSync to an advisory position. He hired, carefully, people he trusted. He transferred operational control to Walter Strauss, who had been his business partner and who was, Daniel believed, an honest man. He was correct about this. What he had not fully accounted for was what would happen after. The 14 months between Caroline's diagnosis and her death were a period of radical contraction. Daniel's world had narrowed to the hospital, the house, and the specific daily needs of an 8-year-old named Lily, who could feel what was happening to her family before she had the language to describe it. He had read to her every night. He had learned to braid hair. He had made pancakes in the shape of animals, and attended school performances in the front row, and answered every question honestly with the kind of honesty calibrated for an 8-year-old, which requires its own precision. Caroline died on a Tuesday in December. It rained. Lily had been with her grandmother. Daniel had been in the room, holding Caroline's hand, and afterward he had sat in the hospital chair for 2 hours before he was ready to move. He drove home in the rain and made dinner, because Lily would be arriving at 7 and she would need dinner. He made a decision that night that he never reconsidered. He was going to be present. Fully present. Not a father who worked until 9 and attended the performances and the graduations, but was fundamentally elsewhere. He was going to be there, concretely, specifically, daily. The kind of there that leaves a mark on a person's childhood, the kind they carry forward. He sold most of his GreenSync equity back to the company at a fraction of its eventual worth. At the time, the company was in a difficult position, a failed Series B. 2 key clients lost in the same quarter, and the cash infusion from Daniel's share buyback had kept it operational. Walter had asked him, in a quiet office, with unusual directness, "Are you certain?" Daniel had said yes. Walter had not asked again. Walter had made the company work. He was, as Daniel had assessed, an honest man, and a capable one who had spent his career learning how to do the things Daniel could not do, and had never particularly wanted to. He'd rebuilt the client base, brought in new investment, renamed and repositioned the company as a realist corporation, as it expanded beyond the founding technology into broader sustainable infrastructure consulting. He had never publicly denied Daniel's role in the company's origins. He had mentioned it, when asked. In general terms, we had a brilliant technical co-founder without the specificity that would have made it real to people who hadn't been there. He had simply never been asked, directly, by anyone who had the context to ask the right questions. History tends to simplify in the direction of whoever stayed. The new generation of leadership at Aurelius, the executives who had joined in the years since the repositioning, knew the company's founding story the way most people know historical events. In broad strokes, minus the human specificity. They knew there had been an early technical architecture that remained, essentially unchanged, at the core of the company's proprietary systems. What they did not know, what Amelia Grant had never known, was that the architecture had an author, that the author had spent the last 6 years checking on it personally, quietly, under a landscaping contract, because he was constitutionally incapable of letting something he'd built fall apart through neglect. And because the garden had been his wife's idea, in the beginning, he had told her, once, about the concept, the integration of living systems with mechanical infrastructure, and she had closed her book and said, "That's not just engineering, Daniel. That's philosophy." He had never stopped wanting to be somewhere that thought so. The East Living Wall's thermal cascade began at 9:47 p.m. The building's climate monitoring system, designed, originally, to send alerts through a chain of escalating notifications, had been modified 3 years earlier by a systems integration firm that Aurelis had contracted for a platform upgrade. The upgrade had introduced a conflict in the alert routing logic that Daniel had identified and documented and submitted through the landscaping contractor's facilities channel. The documentation had been filed. Nobody had acted on it. Now the Living Wall's embedded sensor array was reporting temperatures that, if left unaddressed, would trigger the building's fire suppression response, specifically the CO2 suppression system in the server corridor behind the east atrium, which would vent directly into a space where, at that precise moment, 47 people were mingling over canopies. The Aurelis engineering team on site consisted of 3 people. Their names were Marcus Webb, Priya Desai, and Jeff Kowalski. They were, each of them, competent professionals. They had been working on the fault for 22 minutes. They had not found it. Marcus was in the server room with a tablet and an expression of increasing alarm. Priya was on a call with the off-site systems team. Jeff had physically traced 3 possible fault points and ruled out all 3. None of them had the original system documentation. The original system documentation existed in one complete version, maintained by hand, updated periodically, stored in a binder in Daniel Carter's workshop in Millbrook. Walter Strauss found out about the technical fault at 9:52 p.m. when Marcus Webb, white-faced, speaking quietly, came to find him at the edge of the investor reception. Walter listened for approximately 45 seconds. Then he said, "Where's Daniel Carter?" Marcus looked at him blankly. "The landscaping contractor," Walter said. "Daniel Carter. He was here earlier tonight." "Where did he go?" Marcus started, stopped. "He was asked to leave. Miss Grant asked security to—" Walter was already moving. He found Amelia near the bar, deep in a conversation with a woman from a sovereign wealth fund. And he interrupted it without apology, which was not something he had ever done in his 20 years of knowing her. "Amelia." His voice was quiet and precise. "I need you to have security find Daniel Carter immediately and bring him back into the building." Amelia looked at him. "Walter, the man in the green jacket that you had removed from the lobby." Walter kept his voice even. "Please, have someone find him now. He's a groundskeeper." "We have engineers." "Amelia." Something in Walter's voice stopped her. She had known him for 9 years. She had heard him angry perhaps twice. This was not anger exactly. This was something more serious than anger. "I am asking you as chairman of this board to please do this immediately. I will explain everything, but please do it now." A long moment. Amelia took out her phone. Daniel had not left the campus. He had gone to his truck, parked in the service lot, and sat behind the wheel for 7 minutes, running through the fault scenario in his mind. He had known, with near certainty, what would happen if the thermal cascade in the east wall wasn't addressed within the next 40 minutes. He had been deciding whether to call the building's emergency maintenance line, which would route through a call center and take time he didn't think they had, or to simply walk back to the service entrance and take his chances. He had just reached for his phone when the security guard, Tyler, the same one from earlier, looking considerably less certain than he had 45 minutes ago, knocked on the truck window and asked if Mr. Carter would please come back inside. Daniel looked at the young man. He got out of the truck. He walked back through the service entrance and directly to the server corridor, bypassing the event entirely. Marcus, Priya, and Jeff were still in the room. Marcus looked up when Daniel entered, started to say something bureaucratic about access credentials, and then stopped when he saw Walter Strauss come through the door behind Daniel. Daniel set his pruning tool down on the floor outside the door and looked at the monitoring console. He stood there for perhaps 90 seconds, completely still, his eyes moving across the readouts with the kind of focused economy that takes either intuition or deep familiarity or both. The 2021 integration updated the thermal routing logic, he said. But they used a modified handshake for the sensor arrays, without adjusting the response thresholds in the base layer. The system thinks it's running a cooling cycle, but it's actually in a feedback loop. It keeps calling for more cooling. The cooling system reads the wall sensors as satisfied, and neither side knows the other is wrong. Jeff Kowalski stared at him. How do you know about the 2021 integration? I wrote the maintenance brief for it. Daniel was already at the console. I flagged this exact conflict in October 2022. It's in the facilities documentation. We don't have that documentation. No, Daniel said, without inflection. You don't. He worked for 11 minutes. The room was very quiet. Marcus and Priya watched him the way you watch someone do something you could not do. Jeff, who had been with Auralis's engineering team for 6 years and considered himself, with some justification, technically sophisticated, watched with a more complex expression. Daniel did not use the tablet. He worked from the physical interface, navigating menus from memory, adjusting values in the base configuration layer that none of the 3 engineers had known existed. His hands were steady. His face was calm in the way that experienced surgeons' faces are calm, not the absence of awareness, but its complete absorption. At minute 8, Priya said, very quietly. How do you know this system? Daniel did not look up from the console. Because I wrote it, he said. The room absorbed this. At minute 11, the alert cascade stopped. The temperature readings on the east wall sensor array began to drop, steadily, toward nominal. The server corridor's ambient temperature, which had been climbing toward the CO2 suppression trigger, leveled and began to fall. The risk was over. Daniel straightened up. He looked at the 3 engineers, who were looking at him. The base layer documentation is in binder 3 of the original GreenSync technical archive, he said. If Auralus doesn't have a copy, I have the original. You should have it on record before the next integration cycle. Walter Strauss, who had been standing near the door for the past 11 minutes without speaking, said, Thank you, Daniel. Daniel picked up his pruning tool from the floor. He was heading toward the service exit when Amelia Grant appeared in the corridor doorway. She had come to see the situation herself. She had arrived 2 minutes before the cascade resolved. She had stood in the doorway and watched the last 3 minutes of Daniel Carter working at her company's most critical infrastructure system with the ease of someone walking through their own home. She stood in the doorway now and looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. I'll get out of your way, Daniel said. He moved past her into the corridor. Walter asked Amelia to come to his office, not the event space, his actual office. On the 14th floor, the one with the photograph on the desk, she came. She sat across from him. She had the particular expression of a person who has begun to understand that the ground beneath them is different from what they thought. Walter set the photograph on the desk between them. She looked at it. She recognized Walter younger, lighter, laughing. She looked at the other man, dark-haired, a marker in his hand. The expression of a person mid-discovery. She looked up at Walter. Auralis didn't start with me, Walter said. You know that. You know the company was founded in 2002 as GreenSync, a technology company, not a consulting firm. What the official history doesn't fully capture, what I have never hidden, but also never adequately explained, is that I was the business architect. The operations, the capital, the relationships. He paused. The technology was Daniel's. All of it. The core platform architecture that Auralis's proprietary systems still run on the climate integration framework. The biological mechanical feedback system, the sensor array protocols, Daniel designed them. Daniel wrote them. Daniel installed the first 3 systems himself, physically, because we couldn't afford to hire installers. Amelia was very still. When Caroline got sick, Walter continued. Daniel restructured everything overnight. He transferred operational control to me. He sold his equity back at a price that saved the company from collapse. We were in a very difficult position that year, and his liquidity was the difference between Auralis existing and Auralis not existing. He asked for nothing in return, except for me to keep it going, and to take care of the people who worked there. A pause. He has been on a landscaping contract with this company for 6 years, because he can't stop caring about the system he built. He monitors it. He updates the documentation when integrations introduce conflicts. He fixed, tonight, a fault that our engineering team, which is excellent, could not find, because our engineering team doesn't have the original system architecture committed to memory. The window behind Walter showed the city at night, the particular density of light that large cities make. Daniel Carter did not build this company to own it. He built it because he believed in what it could do. He walked away from it, from the credit, from the wealth, from the recognition, because his daughter needed a father who was present. And he has spent the subsequent 20 years being exactly that, without complaint, and without ever once suggesting that he was owed anything. Walter folded his hands on the desk. Tonight, you publicly humiliated him in front of investors, board members, and his colleagues, in the lobby of a building that exists because of him. Walter's voice was not accusatory. It was something more demanding than accusation. I want you to understand exactly what happened tonight, Amelia. I want you to hold that clearly. Amelia Grant sat in the chair across from Walter Strauss for a long time. She was, beneath everything, beneath the Forbes covers and the controlled voice and the charcoal dress and the architecture of control, she had built around herself a person who had gotten where she was partly through genuine intelligence and partly through a story she had told herself, that she had made herself, that her position was purely the result of her own construction, that the platform she stood on was one she had built. She was sitting with the understanding that the platform had a foundation she had never looked at, that beneath everything she had built, there were decisions made by a man she had just ordered removed from a lobby, whose name she had not known, whose boots had tracked mud on marble floors she would not have had without him. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She had built her self-image on the clean narrative of meritocracy, that she had started with nothing exceptional, had worked with exceptional rigor, and had earned everything she had through the quality of her thinking and the force of her will. This narrative was not entirely false. She had worked with genuine intensity. She had made real decisions well. She had grown Aurelis's revenue by 40% in 4 years, had navigated 2 significant market contractions, had restructured the company's partnership model in ways that had genuinely strengthened it. But she had done all of this on a foundation she had not built. She had inherited a technical core that was, as the engineering team now understood, sophisticated and durable in ways that its successors, the people who had maintained it without comprehending it, had not fully appreciated. She had inherited a reputation for innovation that had originated, in large part, with a man who had been working in her building for 6 years without her ever having learned his name. She had thought of herself as self-made. She was reckoning, now, with the particular discomfort of discovering that no one is. Walter did not press her. He was 71 years old and had sat with difficult truths for a long time and had learned that the pressing never helps. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the carafe on his desk and pushed one toward her and waited. I owe him an apology, Amelia said finally. Yes, Walter agreed. And more than that, much more. But start with the apology. She found him in the parking structure, still in his truck, now with the engine running, radio on low. He had not left yet. She was not sure why. She knocked on the window. He turned it off and got out. They stood in the concrete shelter of the parking structure, which was not a setting either of them would have chosen for this conversation. I owe you an apology, Amelia said. Daniel looked at her. Several, actually. She had lost, somewhere between Walter's office and this parking structure, the particular precision of her composure. Her voice was controlled but only just. Tonight, specifically, and more broadly for what I said in the lobby, in front of everyone, and for not having any idea who you were, which was my failure, not yours. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I don't need an apology, he said finally. I need the engineering team to have the original system documentation before your next integration cycle. I'll send Walter a copy of the full archive. That's not. She stopped. Reorganized. I'm not talking about the system. I'm talking about what I said to you, how I spoke to you. I know what you're talking about. And Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He had eyes that were very direct, not unkind, but undeflectable. The eyes of a person who had long since stopped investing energy in impressions. You didn't know who I was, he said. That's true. But you also spoke to me the way you spoke to me because of what I was wearing and what kind of work I appeared to be doing. You would not have spoken to someone in a suit that way, even if they'd been equally out of place. Amelia said nothing. The apology I'd like, Daniel continued, is less about me specifically and more about whether tonight changed how you understand your position. Because the company has a lot of people in it. Most of them you'll never learn the backstory of. Most of them will never have a reason to justify their presence to you the way events forced me to tonight. And most of them are worth treating with basic dignity regardless. The fluorescent lights of the parking structure buzzed faintly above them. I built this company because I believed in what it could do, Daniel said, not for recognition. I left because my daughter needed me. Both of those things were choices I made freely. And I don't regret either of them. What I don't particularly enjoy is watching something I built become a place where a person's worth is determined by whether they're dressed appropriately for an investor reception. He reached for his door handle. The archive will be with Walter by the end of the week. He drove away. Amelia stood in the parking structure for a while. The videos from the event circulated internally first. Someone had caught Amelia's confrontation with Daniel on a phone. Specifically, the moment when she had said, "You're just a groundskeeper," and Daniel had responded with his quiet, factual warning about the system. The contrast was unmistakable. The woman in the expensive dress, dismissive and certain. The man in the work jacket, precise and correct. The internal circulation was enough. Aurelius's staff, 1,200 people across 4 offices, had not, for the most part, loved the direction the company had taken under Amelia Grant's leadership in the past year and a half. There had been a policy overhaul that had eliminated the flex schedule program. There had been a restructuring that had relocated a customer support team with minimal notice. There had been a general tightening of what one department head described in a private message, subsequently forwarded many times, as the warmth of the place. The video did not make Aurelius employees angry exactly. It confirmed something they had been feeling for some time. Marcus Webb, who had been in the server room when Daniel had said "because I wrote it," told the story to his team lead. His team lead told the story at a weekly engineering sync. Within 48 hours, the engineering team had independently located a reference to GreenSync's founding technical lead in a 2004 trade publication, a profile of the company that described, in technical terms that the engineers recognized as the precise precursors to Aurelius's current architecture, a man named Daniel Carter. The revelation moved through the company, the way revelations do when they confirm what people had already felt, without being able to name. Walter Strauss received 14 separate messages in 3 days from senior staff, asking versions of the same question. What are we going to do about this? Amelia Grant received 31 meeting requests in the same period, from people who had never before requested meetings with her. She accepted all of them. The first meeting she accepted was with the customer support team that had been relocated. She went to their new office, which was a floor she had never been on, in a building that was not the headquarters. And she sat in a conference room that was smaller than her own office's bathroom, and she listened for 2 hours. She had not, in her career, been a person who listened at length. She had been a person who synthesized quickly and moved. She had believed and had been told, many times, by many people who benefited from telling her that this was a strength. She was discovering, in the conference room on the 6th floor of the building she'd never visited, that it was also a limitation. The team lead, whose name was Sandra Briggs and who had been with the company for 8 years, told her with careful precision exactly what the relocation had cost people. Not abstractly, specifically, the commute changes, the childcare disruptions. The 2 employees who had left because the new location was unworkable for them. Sandra Briggs did not raise her voice. She was not attempting to make Amelia feel bad. She was simply reporting facts to the person who had the authority to hear them. Amelia listened. She asked questions, not rhetorical ones, Actual questions, about specific impacts, about what could be addressed, about what couldn't be undone but could be compensated for. She left the meeting with a notepad full of handwriting. That was the first meeting. There were 30 more. She called Daniel Carter on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the anniversary event. She had gotten his number from the landscaping contractor's account manager. He answered on the fourth ring. "This is Amelia Grant," she said. "From Aurelis. I'm sorry to call without warning. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet with me." "A pause. What kind of meeting?" he said. "I've been spending the past 3 weeks talking to people inside the company. Listening to them. I'm trying to understand what's been lost over the past year and a half, and what might be recoverable." "A beat. I think I understand some of what you meant in the parking structure. I'm not sure I understand all of it. I thought you might be willing to tell me what I'm still missing." Another pause. Longer. "I'm not interested in a consulting arrangement," he said. "I'm not asking for one. I'm asking for a conversation." The longest pause. "I have a vegetable garden that needs winterizing on Saturday," Daniel said. "If you want to have a conversation while that happens, I have about 2 hours." She drove to Millbrook in her own car, without a driver, wearing clothes that were practical rather than deliberate. She pulled on her phone's navigation for the last mile, found the house, and sat in the driveway for a moment before getting out. The house was a sensible house. The vegetable garden along the south fence was clearly the work of someone who had thought carefully about drainage and sun angles and companion planting. The workshop in the garage was visible through the open door. Daniel was in the garden with a pitchfork. He looked up when she came through the gate. He nodded at a second pitchfork leaning against the fence. She took it. They worked for a while before either of them said anything substantive. This was not awkward. It had the quality, instead, of something that needed to happen before talking could. "The company has good people," Amelia said finally, turning soil at the edge of the bed. "I knew that. I've always known that, but I think I started treating them as a resource rather than as the actual point of the thing." Daniel turned soil on his end. "When did that change?" She thought about it honestly. "Gradually. Then all at once, the way things do." She paused. "I think when the company got to a certain scale, I became more afraid of it falling apart, and I responded to that fear by tightening control, which made people feel less trusted, which made me feel less in control, which made me tighten more." "A feedback loop," Daniel said. "Yes." He let that sit for a moment. "The system I built," he said, "the one the company still runs on the core principle, is that biological systems and mechanical systems don't work against each other. They work with each other, or the whole thing breaks down. The living wall doesn't serve the HVAC. The HVAC doesn't serve the living wall. They're the same system. One fails, the other fails." He drove the pitchfork into the earth. Organizations are the same. The people aren't a resource that serves the company. They are the company. If you treat them as a means rather than the point, eventually the point disappears. Amelia was quiet for a while. "I owe a lot of people more than an apology," she said. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "But apologies are where you start." The spring that followed was a complicated one for Aurelis Corporation. The flex schedule policy was restored in February, with adjustments that made it more comprehensive than it had been previously. The customer support team was given the option to return to the headquarters building, with individualized transition timelines for people whose circumstances required them. 3 employees who had left were approached personally by Amelia and offered positions. 2 returned. None of this was announced with fanfare. It happened the way necessary corrections happen, when they're made by people who understand that fanfare is not the same as accountability. Amelia had a standing Saturday morning call with Sandra Briggs for 5 months. It had started as a structured check-in, and had become something more like a direct channel, a way of hearing what was true before it became a crisis, which is, in the end, what actual leadership requires. She had not yet found the right way to address the company's founding history publicly. She had discussed it with Walter several times. He had counseled patience, which she was learning to accept as practical rather than evasive. In April, she called Daniel. The board of directors' annual meeting was held on a Thursday in May. At the beginning of the meeting, Before the reports, and the projections, and the strategic reviews, Amelia Grant showed a photograph on the screen at the front of the room. Two men, in a shared workspace, surrounded by whiteboards. One older, one younger, dark-haired, a marker in his hand. Mid-discovery. She told the story as completely as she could. The founding of GreenSync. The technology that Daniel Carter had built. The moment Caroline had gotten sick, and the choice Daniel had made, and what that choice had cost him and given him simultaneously. The years of quiet maintenance. The anniversary event. The parking structure. She did not narrate her own behavior that night with any self-exculpation. She stated what she had done, and what it had reflected about her, and about the culture she had been building without meaning to. Which is the most dangerous kind of culture to build. The room was quiet throughout. Afterward, she said, "Daniel Carter has declined every offer to return to a formal role at Aurelius, which is his right, and reflects priorities that I respect completely. What the board is approving today is a proposal to formally acknowledge his contribution in the company's public history, to ensure that the original technical archive is properly preserved and credited, and to designate the central green space at the headquarters campus in his name." The vote was unanimous. The installation of the garden dedication took place in June. It was a small ceremony. Walter was there. Several of the engineering team, including Marcus Webb and Priya Desai, who had been in the server room that November night, and who had not forgotten what they had witnessed. Sandra Briggs came from the customer support team. A few of the remaining people who had been with the company in its GreenSync days, and who recognized Daniel when they saw him, and who found, to varying degrees, that seeing him was more affecting than they had expected. One woman who had been an early administrative assistant, now in her late 50s, retired, but invited by Walter, personally cried briefly, and without embarrassment, and then composed herself, and went to shake Daniel's hand and said, "We always wondered if you were okay." He had said, "I was always okay." Lily was there. She stood next to her father with her hand in his arm, and she looked at the garden, a space he had shaped over 6 years. The rooftop plantings and the living walls and the atrium that had been in 3 architecture publications, and she looked at the small bronze plaque at the garden's entrance with his name on it, and she didn't say anything for a while. She had grown up knowing her father as a man who fixed things and grew things, and was steadily, reliably present. She had known, in general terms, that he had worked in technology before she was old enough to remember. She had not known the specifics, because he had never offered them, and she had not asked in the way that children don't ask about the world before they existed. She had spent the winter learning. She had read the 2004 trade publication profile that the engineering team had found. She had asked Walter, over a long phone call in February, to tell her what he remembered about her father in those years. She had listened to an hour and a half of a man who had known her father longer than she had, describing a version of him she was simultaneously meeting for the first time and recognizing completely. She had not told her father about the call. She wasn't sure she needed to. "The Carter Garden," she read, finally. "It was already the Carter Garden," Daniel said. "They just made it official." She laughed. He smiled. The bronze plaque read, "In honor of Daniel Carter, whose vision shaped this space and the principles that animate everything within it." Amelia spoke briefly at the ceremony. She had written and rewritten it several times, and had ended up with something short. "There is a version of this company's story in which Daniel Carter is a footnote," she said, "in which the origin is named and the person who made it is abstracted into a timeline. That version is easier to tell. It fits the format of a press release. It doesn't require any of us to reckon with what it means that someone can build something this significant and then walk away from the credit and the wealth and the recognition, without bitterness, to be a father to his daughter." She paused. "I used to think that leadership was about not needing anyone, about being self-sufficient at scale, about controlling enough variables that outcomes were predictable." She looked at Daniel, who was standing near the garden's edge, with the particular stillness of a person who is comfortable being present without being central. "I've spent the last 6 months learning that I had it backward. The people who build things that last really last are the ones who understand that they are building for others. That the measure of what you've made is not what it gave you, but what it gave the people who came after." She cleared her throat. We named this garden for Daniel Carter. But in a real sense, everything here is already his. Afterward, when the small gathering had dispersed and Lily had gone to talk to Walter and the catering people were quietly disassembling a table, Amelia found Daniel standing at the far edge of the rooftop garden, looking out over the city. She stood next to him. They were quiet for a while. "How does it feel?" she said eventually. He thought about it. "Strange," he said. "I spent a long time not being attached to this place. I thought I wasn't. But I kept coming back to fix the system." A pause. "I suppose that's attachment, just a quieter kind." The city spread out below them. The light was the particular warm quality of a late afternoon in June. "For what it's worth," Amelia said, "I think you made the right choice. The one you made when Caroline got sick." She paused. "I think Lily got the better end of the deal, and I think Aurelis as an institution got something from having you care about it from a distance, without recognition, that it could never have gotten from having you care about it from inside and up close." Daniel looked at her. "That's a generous reading," he said. "Maybe. But I mean it." He looked back at the city, below them, through the glass of the atrium, the living walls, the ones he had designed and installed and maintained and returned to. Year after year, quietly, without announcement, were green and dense, and alive with the specific exuberance of things that have been well tended. "I didn't build it because I wanted to own it," Daniel said. "I built it because I thought it was worth building." He paused. "That's still true." The sun moved. The shadows of the city changed. He put his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the garden that bore his name, and he looked at the city beyond it, and for a long time neither of them said anything. He was smiling. It was a quiet smile, not triumphant, not relieved. The smile of a man who has been exactly where he intended to be, doing exactly what he intended to do, and who does not require the world to have noticed. Lily came to stand beside him after a few minutes, having finished her conversation with Walter. She looked at the garden. She looked at her father's profile, the specific angle of a face she had known her whole life, which looked, as faces do, more like itself in certain kinds of light. "Mom would have loved this," she said. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She would have thought the sensor array integration in the third living wall was inelegant," he said. "She was very particular about mycorrhizal analogs in artificial systems." Lily laughed. It was her mother's laugh. "But yes," he said. "She would have loved it." The city moved and breathed below them. The garden was green. The plaque at its entrance caught the late afternoon light and held it for a moment. The way bronze does, warm, specific, unhurried. The Carter Garden. Below, through the glass of the atrium, the living walls were dense and layered with the specific vitality of things that have been well tended over a long time, not just maintained, cared for. There is a difference, and the difference is visible if you know how to look. Some things are built for recognition. Some things are built because they are worth building. The difference, in the end, is what lasts.